If you observe carefully, something extraordinary and deeply unsettling is happening right under our noses, hidden in plain sight within the mundane routines of modern life. Millions of Americans wake up every day, commute to their jobs, diligently pay their bills, and retire at night believing they are following the golden rules of financial responsibility. They look at their digital bank statements or paper records and feel a sense of security, thinking, I have the same amount of money I had last month, therefore I am safe. But here lies the fundamental deception of the modern era, a truth that few understand until it is far too late. You are losing money every single day, even when the numbers in your account remain perfectly static. This is the great financial paradox. In a world of aggressive monetary expansion, standing still is the equivalent of sprinting backward. How is this possible? The answer is not found in a sudden market crash or a visible theft, but in one of the most powerful and misunderstood forces in the global economy, the silent degradation of the currency's value. This isn't a conspiracy theory or an alarmist prediction designed to incite fear. It is a cold, mathematical, and historical consequence of how monetary systems function when they are untethered from physical constraints. When you understand the hidden incentives behind the Federal Reserve's decisions, you begin to see why your purchasing power is being systematically eroded. History serves as an uncompromising teacher, showing us that we are living through a specific economic phenomenon that has occurred multiple times over the last 5 centuries. The only difference today is the scale and the digital speed at which it happens. The tragedy of the safe saver is that they are playing a game with 19th century rules in a 21st century arena. They optimize for perceived risk, the short-term fluctuations of the stock market, while completely ignoring the real risk, the guaranteed loss of what their money can actually buy in the future. Imagine a giant treadmill moving backward at a steady pace. If you stand still, the machine carries you toward the edge. To simply maintain your position, you must walk forward. To actually gain ground, you must run. Most people are currently standing still, unaware that the floor beneath them is moving. This silent theft is the defining economic challenge of our generation. To understand why our current situation is so precarious, we must look beyond the present moment and consult the long arc of history. History is not merely a collection of dates. It is a catalog of human incentives. And monetary history teaches us one immutable lesson. Whenever a governing body gains the power to create money without the constraint of a physical anchor, the temptation to overissue becomes an eventual certainty. This is not an American pattern. It is a human pattern that transcends geography and time. The story begins with the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. At that time, the U.S. dollar was fundamentally linked to gold, with an ounce of gold priced at approximately $20. This link provided a hard constraint on the supply of money. If you had tucked $100 under a mattress in 1913, that money would have retained its ability to purchase roughly the same amount of goods for decades. However, today, that same $100 would possess less than $3 of that original purchasing power. This wasn't a freak accident or the result of a single bad administration. It was the predictable, slow-motion outcome of a system designed to expand. We have seen this cycle repeat for centuries. The Roman Empire did this when they began mixing base metals like copper into their silver denarius. The Ming Dynasty in China did this when they printed paper currency in such excess that it eventually became worthless for trade. The Weimar Republic in 1920 seconds. Germany and Zimbabwe in the 2000s are more extreme examples, but they followed the same logical progression. The power to create money is used sparingly to manage growth. Crisis, a war, a pandemic, or a financial collapse forces the government to print to survive. Normalization. Printing becomes a standard political tool to fund social programs or debt. The currency loses value gradually, then eventually rapidly. In the modern context, the Federal Reserve doesn't use a physical printing press as much as it uses digital ledger entries through a process known as open market operations, or more recently, quantitative easing, QE. The Fed creates new money out of thin air to purchase government bonds or other financial assets. Since the financial crisis of 2008, the Fed's balance sheet has expanded by a staggering 400%. When the Fed buys a bond from a commercial bank, they simply credit that bank's account with new reserves. This money did not exist a second before the transaction. It is as if a central authority has the magical ability to write checks without any funds in the account, and the rest of the world is forced to honor them. While the United States enjoys the exorbitant privilege of having the dollar as the world's reserve currency, giving us more time to correct our imbalances than a country like Zimbabwe, the fundamental laws of mathematics still apply. If you increase the supply of any unit, whether it be potatoes, cars, or dollars, faster than the demand for it, the value of that unit must decrease. We are currently living through the largest monetary experiment in human history. We are testing whether a global superpower can expand its money supply indefinitely without facing the same fate as the empires that preceded it. The mechanics are modern and digital, but the underlying pressure, the need to solve complex structural problems with the magic of currency creation, is as old as civilization itself. To understand why the influx of new money doesn't make everyone richer, we must look at a principle discovered by Richard Cantillon, an 18th century Irish-French economist. He observed that when a central authority increases the money supply, the new money does not distribute itself evenly or instantaneously across the entire economy. Instead, it enters at specific points, benefiting those who are closest to the source while penalizing those who reside at the periphery. This phenomenon, known as the Cantillon effect, is the primary reason why wealth inequality has reached historic levels in the decades following the Federal Reserve's shift toward aggressive monetary intervention. When the Fed creates money through digital ledger entries, it doesn't drop cash from helicopters over every household. It injects this liquidity directly into the financial system. The primary recipients are large commercial banks, hedge funds, and major government-sanctioned dealers. These entities receive the new money first. Crucially, they are able to spend or invest this capital at the old price levels before the market has had time to adjust to the increased supply of currency. Image: a diagram showing money flowing from the central bank to Wall Street first, then slowly trickling down to Main Street as prices rise. With this fresh liquidity, these early recipients buy up assets: stocks, corporate bonds, commercial real estate, and commodities. This surge in demand naturally drives up the prices of these assets. By the time the new money trickles down to the average worker in the form of wages or general circulation, the costs of housing, education, and healthcare have already inflated. The people at the end of the chain, salaried employees, retirees on fixed incomes, and small savers, receive the new money last, and they are forced to spend it on goods and services that have already become more expensive. This is why we see a strange decoupling in the modern economy. The stock market can hit record highs while the average family struggles to afford basic groceries. Since the massive quantitative easing began in 2008, those who own financial assets have seen their net worth skyrocket, not necessarily because the companies they own became more productive, but because the currency used to value those assets was being devalued. If you depend on a paycheck, you are running a race where the finish line is being moved further away every time the Fed expands its balance sheet. Your labor is traded for a currency that loses its value, while the wealthy trade that currency for assets that preserve it. Understanding the Cantillon effect reveals that inflation is not just a general rise in prices. It is a profound redistribution of wealth from the poor and the middle class to the politically connected and the asset-owning elite. Governments and central banks maintain a complicated, often contradictory relationship with inflation. Officially, their mandate is to ensure price stability, usually defined as a modest 2% annual increase. In practice, however, inflation serves as a vital political escape hatch, a way to solve structural fiscal problems without the unpopularity of direct taxation. If you have ever wondered why the government seems concerned about inflation in public while continuing the very policies that fuel it, you must understand the mathematics of sovereign debt. The United States currently carries a national debt exceeding $31 trillion. In a world of sound money, such a debt would be an insurmountable burden, requiring painful spending cuts or massive tax hikes that would end political careers. But inflation changes the math. If the currency loses 3% to 5% of its value every year, the real value of that $31 trillion debt shrinks accordingly. The government pays back its creditors with dollars that have significantly less purchasing power than the dollars they originally borrowed. This is known as financial repression. Inflation is, for all intents and purposes, an invisible tax. Unlike a sales tax or an income tax, it does not require a vote in Congress, and it doesn't appear as a line item on your pay stub. It is a silent transfer of wealth from the private citizen to the state. When the government spends more than it collects in taxes, it bridges the gap by issuing debt, which the Federal Reserve then effectively monetizes. This increases the money supply, which devalues the currency, which raises the price of your bread and gasoline. You are paying for the government's deficit spending through the increased cost of your life. Historically, this is the path of least resistance for every empire that has overextended itself. Raising taxes causes riots. Cutting benefits causes social unrest. But devaluing the currency is subtle. It happens slowly enough that most people blame the grocer, the oil company, or a distant war for the rising prices, rather than the central bank's monetary policy. Furthermore, the Fed's policy of keeping interest rates artificially low, often below the real rate of inflation, creates a wealth effect that serves a specific purpose. It forces individuals to move their money out of safe savings accounts and into risk assets like the stock market and real estate to avoid being eaten alive by inflation. This creates a facade of prosperity and keeps asset prices high, but it also leaves the average citizen vulnerable to market bubbles. The government needs you to take more risk to bail out the system, even if that risk isn't in your personal best interest. In this environment, the responsible saver is the one who is punished most severely to keep the engine of debt-fueled growth turning. The abstract concepts of monetary policy and the Cantillon effect may seem like distant academic theories, but their consequences are felt in the kitchen tables and bank accounts of every household. To truly understand the gravity of our situation, we must look at the human cost, the real-world casualties of an economy built on perpetual devaluation. These are not people who made reckless bets. They are individuals who followed the traditional rules of financial prudence only to find that the rules themselves had been rigged against them. Consider the story of Margaret, a woman who retired in 2015 after 40 years of hard work. She had saved $500,000, a sum she believed would provide a comfortable, dignified life. Following the safe advice of her generation, she placed her nest egg into CDs and high-quality government bonds. By 2025, her account still showed a balance of $500,000. Nominally, she had lost nothing, but in the real world, The world where she has to buy eggs, pay for heating, and settle her medical bills, she is in a state of crisis. Her grocery bills have climbed by 40%, her utilities have surged, and the cost of her supplemental health insurance has nearly doubled. Margaret didn't lose her wealth in a dramatic market crash. She lost it through a decade of safe decisions in an era of experimental monetary policy. Then there is David, a middle manager earning $75,000 a year. On paper, David is doing well. He receives a 3% raise every year and feels a sense of career progression. However, David lives on what we call the economic treadmill. While his income grows at a steady, linear pace, the cost of the assets he needs to build a future, a home for his family, a college education for his children, and a retirement portfolio is growing at a parabolic rate of 8% to 12% annually. Despite his hard work and his raises, David is actually moving further away from his goals every year. He is running as fast as he can, yet the treadmill is accelerating even faster. The most tragic casualty of this system is the younger generation, represented by people like Sarah. Sarah graduated in 2023 with a degree and $40,000 in debt. She landed a job paying $55,000 a salary that would have made her parents feel wealthy 30 years ago. But the math has changed. The modest starter home her parents bought for $150,000 in the mid-90s now commands a price tag of $450,000. Sarah would need 3 times the purchasing power her parents possessed just to achieve the same basic milestone of home ownership. For Sarah, the American dream isn't just difficult. It's being priced out of existence by a currency that no longer serves as a reliable store of value. Even small business owners like Tom are being squeezed. Tom runs a manufacturing shop with 15 employees. He faces cost-push inflation, his raw material costs are up 25%, and he has to raise wages to help his staff survive. Yet, due to intense competition and a consumer base that is also struggling, he can only raise his selling prices by 8%. Unlike a massive corporation, Tom doesn't have a direct line to the Fed's cheap credit. He is trapped in the middle, his profit margins evaporating even as his nominal revenue reaches record highs. This is the cruelty of the compound effect. We often hear that 3% inflation is low, but if you lose 3% of your purchasing power every year for 20 years, you don't lose 60%. Due to the way value erodes, you lose nearly half of your real-world wealth. The system is designed to make you feel like you are standing still, while in reality, you are being slowly carried out to sea by a tide of new currency. Understanding this treadmill is the first step toward jumping off it. The realization that the financial rules of the game have fundamentally changed can be overwhelming, but it is also the beginning of true financial liberation. If the traditional path of safe savings and fixed income bonds is now a guaranteed way to lose wealth, the only logical response is to adapt. Real wealth preservation in the 21st century is not about avoiding volatility, it is about avoiding the permanent loss of purchasing power. To do this, you must move your capital out of the devaluation zone and into assets that the Federal Reserve cannot simply print into existence. A modern defensive strategy requires a shift from nominal thinking to real thinking. You must stop asking, how many dollars do I have? And start asking, what does my wealth command in terms of real-world resources? A resilient portfolio today should be built on a foundation of hard assets. These include stocks of companies with pricing power, businesses that can raise their prices alongside inflation because their products are essential, and well-located real estate, which serves as a natural hedge because rents typically rise as the currency falls. Beyond traditional equities and property, a robust plan should include exposure to commodities and precious metals like gold, which have served as the ultimate insurance policy against currency debasement for thousands of years. In recent years, even digital assets have emerged as a digital gold alternative for those seeking a fixed supply hedge outside the traditional banking system. A diversified allocation might look like 35% in inflation-resistant stocks, 25% in real estate or REITs, 15% in commodities, and 10% in gold or alternative stores of value. Crucially, you must maintain flexibility. The era of set it and forget it investing is over. You must keep some liquidity for emergencies, typically 6 to 12 months of expenses, but any capital beyond that must be put to work. You are in a race against a treadmill that is moving at 5% to 10% per year. If your money is earning 1% in a savings account, you are losing the race. The ultimate goal of understanding these monetary cycles is not to become a billionaire overnight, but to ensure that the fruits of your labor are not stolen by the invisible tax of inflation. History shows that those who recognize the patterns of currency debasement early are the ones who survive the transition with their standard of living intact. The game has changed, the treadmill has accelerated, and the old safety nets have become traps. By positioning yourself in assets that benefit from monetary expansion rather than being consumed by it, you can navigate this unprecedented experiment with wisdom, preparation, and confidence.